Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 8th main session of the SADC TFCA webinar series. Today, we're talking about sustainable financing and finance mechanisms available for SADC TFCAs. The session today is led by Pete Teron, who is the International Coordinator for the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Areas. And before I give him the word, may I please remind you all to use the chat box to add your name, institution, and your country where you're calling from so that we know who you are in the chat box. Also, please use the chat box to get in communication with each other, to exchange experiences, information, and also to ask questions for the panelists. If during the presentation or during a discussion you would like to, well, do not during the presentation, sorry, but during a discussion you would like to intervene, please use the raise your hand tool in the chat box as well, so that you can join in the conversation with the panelists and the presenters. My name is Clara Bocchino, and together with Lisa Blanken, who's also presenting today, we are managing this TFCA series. So welcome once again today. And Pete, the floor is yours for the session. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Clara, and welcome colleagues to this, I'm sure, long-awaited and exciting discussion, which is part of the SADC TFCA webinar series, which has been hugely successful. So today we're talking about TFCA finance, which I'm sure it's a topic that interests most of you. So we're looking at sustainable financing and finance mechanisms in TFCAs. And essentially what we've done is, or how we are structured, is we've got three presentations, and we'll have an opportunity after each one of these for some questions, general questions and issues around the clarity, questions around clarity. You'll also notice that we've actually extended this session to a 2-hour session. Usually it's an hour and a half, because we sort of anticipated that there might be really interesting discussions taking place. So the way it's structured is we're first going to have a presentation by Dr. Candace Stevens around sustainable financing options for TFCAs. Then that will be followed by, I'm sure, the long-awaited presentation on the SADC TFCA financing facility by Kudo. And then that will be followed by Lisa, who will give us an overview on project funding in TFCAs. So without further ado, let's start with the presentations. So just want to quickly introduce Candace. I'm sure most of you know her, but so Candace is a biodiversity finance expert, and she's actually specializes in, or previously in tax and how tax relates to biodiversity and landscape conservation. She introduced the first effective biodiversity tax incentive in South Africa, or in the South African Protected Areas Network, and together with the government of South Africa, received the Pathfinder Award for special commendation for this global innovation. She currently heads up the Innovative Finance division at the Wilderness Foundation Africa, where she works extensively with a whole range of different stakeholders and industry leaders across all sectors. And the idea of what they're thriving towards is basically plugging South Africa's finance gap and ensuring that landscape conservation efforts are scalable and sustainable. She's also the co-chair of South Africa's first Sustainable Landscape Finance Coalition. She also sits on a number of national and international committees looking at area-based conservation and financing and resourcing. And her background's in law and commerce, and she's also got experience in protected area policy and expansion, biodiversity finance, environmental law, and policy making on financial incentives. So Candace, welcome to the discussion. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks very much, Pete, and for that extensive introduction. It's fantastic to be on today's session and to be talking about TFCAs, and particularly around sustainable finance. I'm going to share my screen now, and then we'll get into the presentation. So I often get asked the question around financing of sustainable landscape, whether they're protected areas, OECMs, community conservation areas, or other. And let me just say straight off the bat that there is no silver bullet. There is no one size fits all and no one financing solution. But there are some key principles that we can apply. And these principles become more relevant now as we are dealing with the COVID-19 crisis and its implications, and looking at how do we sustainably finance conservation and the various benefits that it has for people and the environment. And then at the same time, how do we create resilient income models? So I want to just set the scene a little bit, and I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but just our annual biodiversity finance needs and sources that we have, just so that we have a broad background picture of what we're dealing with. And what you'll see here is that these are the sources of biodiversity finance globally in US dollars, and that massive orange-yellow section, which looks like a Pac-Man, that is domestic public finance. And what that tells us is that the vast majority of the financial resources that we have, whether they're for TFCAs or other, is that they're coming from national fiscus. They're coming from national government. So it places a huge amount of pressure on governments to be able to fund this. And you'll see that little gray section there, if you can see my cursor moving, that's private finance. And so there's an enormous opportunity to be able to access additional finance from the private sector in particular, and start to even out that puzzle piece. So you'll see that arrow up there is just pointing to that private sector opportunities, which I really believe there is opportunity for increased growth and investment from the private sector. And you'll see there a heavy reliance and now increased pressure due to COVID-19 from domestic public finance. Then setting the scene in terms of what the conservation estimate of economic value of the environment is. So in other words, looking at that huge big blue circle, that is essentially what the environment is providing to us, particularly with biodiversity. And that's an enormous amount, an enormous contribution globally. And what you'll see in this little blue dot over here is the estimated annual biodiversity finance needs that we have. So in other words, biodiversity is providing us with this value contribution. We only need to spend this amount in order to secure that. But what we're actually spending at the moment is this tiny orange dot. And so there is this massive finance gap that we're looking at in order to address our environmental needs, but all those social and economic benefits that the environment provides as well. So essentially that big blue dot is what biodiversity gives us. The small blue dot is what we need to be spending to secure and manage those environmental assets. And that little orange dot is what we're currently spending. We need considerably more money to effectively conserve landscapes. And I'm probably preaching to the choir in this discussion because everybody is well aware of the financial shortages across TFCAs to do the projects that we need to be doing sustainably and at scale. But just to paint a picture, in South Africa, we need to increase the amount that we're spending by 64% just to implement our NBSAP. In Botswana, they've calculated that they need $79 million over the next 10 years. That's additional to what they're currently spending. Eswatini's estimates are similar. And so there's a pattern across SADC that talks to this finance gap across the board. And then, of course, the impacts of COVID-19, where existing revenue streams have been impacted, particularly tourism, but as well as the associated activities and ancillary services around that. So in summary, what is it that we need to address the global underspend on environmental efforts? And this is true, particularly for protected and conserved areas, which form cornerstones in our landscapes and offer those cross-cutting conservation solutions. And this is about having tailor-made finance solutions that will address the global underspend and start to really catalyze the offering that protected and conserved areas and their buffer zones can give us. And essentially, that's about realizing the full potential, both environmental and economic, that then have social benefits. And this means that we have a need for innovation, a need to build new finance sources that are self-sustaining, and we need to be building resilient economic models. And I think the COVID-19 crisis has really highlighted this. But like I said, this isn't a one-size-fits-all. There's no one silver bullet. But there is a lot of hope and a lot of opportunity. So I just want to delve into some terminology around financing and resourcing. And the reason that I'm doing this is because a lot of the time when we talk about financing of a TFCA or a project or an organization or a protected area, we instinctively think about funding, what funds are available, what grants are available. But innovative financing is different. It's about thinking about how do we create new mechanisms and new models so we don't have to be as reliant as we are on those traditional grant and funding mechanisms. And this is the protected area financial sustainability term that I've adapted to TFCAs. And this is a CBD term. And essentially, financial sustainability is the ability to secure stable and sufficient long-term financial resources and to allocate them in a timely manner and appropriate form to cover full costs. And the same applies to TFCAs. So what we're looking at here is financing is the ability to secure stable and sufficient long-term finances, and resourcing is the ability to allocate them in the right way at the right time to cover those full costs. And that financing might come from funds, but a lot of the time those funds and grants are often not stable or sufficient or long-term. They're only one piece of the puzzle. And so we also need to look at developing new sources or streams of money that have not been accessed before. And that's really where innovative financing comes in. And that's the paradigm shift that we need to be making. So it's not to rule out the access to funds and grants, but it's to also build into the mindset when we're building projects, when we're looking at financing, that we need to have an innovative spin on things that doesn't rely on new or non-traditional sources. So to develop new finance innovations that can create additional finance that was never there before for those landscapes, there are a number of different things that we're currently looking at in South Africa. And the slide that you'll see up on the screen is what Wilderness Foundation Africa's Innovative Finance team are focusing on, just as an example of the mind shift and the paradigm shift towards innovative financing. So the new finance innovations that we're currently working on are fiscal solutions, special purpose vehicles to create financial sustainability, carbon payments, debt instruments, and policy advice. The second primary focus point is creating an enabling environment for finance innovation for landscapes. And this is through South Africa's first Sustainable Landscape Finance Coalition in partnership with WWF. So we are focusing on creating new sources of finance with new finance models, but at the same time, we have to be able to create a conservation finance sector that works together with government and with the private sector and with stakeholders on the ground so that we can begin to have financing strategies, to build capacity, to share knowledge, etc., and to be able to create a cohesive and collaborative conservation finance sector, which is critical to be able to advance new models. And then obviously there's delivering the existing finance solutions that we have available. So just by way of example, the tax innovation that Pete alluded to in his introduction, that's been successfully mainstreamed across the country, and we provide those services nationally. And that's introduced up to 1.4 billion into South Africa's protected area network by 2026. And so that is new finance that was never there before. And that's an example of the innovative financing models that we have the opportunity to create. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on the Sustainable Landscape Finance Coalition, which is now working across SADC with Eswatini and hopefully with other partners in future. Our structure is that we have a steering committee and then a council and innovation hub. The council speaks to national high-level advisory body, that builds relationships with key private sector investors, with policymakers, with government, and with other key sectors from agriculture to tourism. The Innovation Hub is really about engaging with stakeholders and to be able to foster that cross-collaboration so that we see new models and new finance innovations start to go to scale, and pilots be given the opportunity to access impact investing if they need it, expertise in a particular skill set if they need it, and hopefully to unlock more and more models that can start to bring in new and additional finance. And then at the bottom rung, you'll see our finance solution incubators, which we're very excited about. And these incubators essentially are investigations into new finance models that haven't been tested in the country before. And we hope to unlock additional finance through each of those incubators in the particular area that we're focusing on. So when we talk about financial sustainability and resilient landscapes, and we can see the impact of not having financial sustainability and resilience in landscapes through COVID-19, there are three primary circles that when we look to address this, these are the ones that interact with one another. So the top is finance mechanisms, which is really the focus of the Sustainable Landscape Finance Coalition and Wilderness Foundation Africa's Innovative Finance Unit. But at the same time, that has to tie in with work being done around rural livelihoods, and that ultimately ties into economies in different areas. And so what you'll see here is that innovative finance is about creating those new finance mechanisms, but pulling it all together with a cohesive conservation finance landscape is really about the interaction of those three together. So some key points when we're looking at that interaction of building finance solutions for landscapes. The first is that each landscape has its own context. So we might find a finance solution that works in South Africa and we won't be able to replicate it exactly in another country, or we might see a specific innovation that happens out of one TFCA. We need to look at each individual landscape and each individual context that we're dealing with in order to create a tailor-made finance solution. And in order to translate the different successes from one TFCA to another or from one landscape to another, what we do is we develop the finance solutions with a number of building blocks. And these building blocks are critical success factors of each finance solution. And by putting in those building blocks, we're able to have greater success with new pilots, greater success with being able to take pilots to scale, and greater success being able to translate the different successes. We can't copy and paste, but we can take principles and building blocks from one landscape to another, and this allows us to translate successes. So just very briefly, part of this building block process is the Sustainable Landscape Finance Coalition's finance solution approach, which follow 4 phases. The first is the incubator, the second is strategy, the third is pilot, and the fourth is scalability. And this finance solution approach can be embedded into each focal landscape and allows us to move very quickly and to be as fast and flexible as possible in creating those new finance solutions. So up on screen, you'll see a description of each of those, which I'm not going to go into now, just in the interest of time. But essentially, the approach follows a 5-year timeline from investigation to scale, and allows us to reduce any waste in time, resources, energy, and effort in being able to determine the viability of each individual finance solution that we're investigating for a particular landscape. So up on screen now, you'll see an example of an established finance solution that followed that exact approach, that went from an initial investigation in an incubator to a strategy and viability and needs analysis in phase 2. It went into a pilot and ultimately went to scale. And this is South Africa's first biodiversity tax incentive, which was introduced into legislation in 2015. And as of 2020, we have now introduced that across numerous provinces in the country. It benefits South Africa's protected areas. And essentially, it allows a private or communal landowner who declares a protected area to deduct the full value of their land from their taxable income. So it's a positive incentive that's dedicated towards biodiversity protection and lends itself to positive behavioral change in perpetuity. And so we estimate by 2026 that this will introduce 83 million US dollars into South Africa's protected area network. And to date, we have overshot those projections. And as of the 2019 tax year of assessment, we're at 189 million Rand, which is in US dollars is roughly 11 million US dollars to date. And this was all possible through institutional support from the South African government. But importantly, what this tax deduction does is that it boosts sustainability and it boosts growth for businesses associated with protected areas. It also enables those protected areas to be managed more efficiently because there's more available cash to do so. And then on top of that, this was a source of funding that came through a new innovative model that was never there before. This wasn't accessing money that had been accessed before. So it's brought in additional resources through a new tool. And this is an example of what the Sustainable Landscape Finance Coalition and Wilderness Foundation Africa are starting to unpack and looking at different models that can apply across different landscapes to be able to bring in innovative financing that was never there before. And this then ties itself in with things like rural livelihoods and economies so that you end up with a sustainable and resilient landscape. So just on a last note for me, COVID-19 for me really is about building back better and about changing our perspective. It's obviously an extremely stressful situation across the board, but we have the opportunity to move from a survivalist mindset and a business as usual mindset to something that looks far more integrated between social, economic, and environmental, and to build those three together. And there are a lot of mainstreaming opportunities that are coming to the fore. And this is really my take-home message for today, is that with the green recovery that various governments are talking about, and as well as the private sector, something like ESG markets on the rise that outperformed traditional markets throughout the crisis, there is a perspective change, a paradigm shift, where the environmental issues are becoming central to our economic and social imperatives. And there are some key pillars to this, which when looking at the future financing for TFCAs, to have this in mind and to build projects and to build proposals around this. So the one is the protection, management, and restoration of natural systems. The other is water, then low carbon economies, and finally financial sector realignment. And that really speaks to bankable projects and impact investing, that opportunities that are available. So ultimately, it's really mindset. To move away from a survival mindset to a new point of innovation, that we don't have to preserve what we have, and we need that collective consciousness across our sector to move quickly and adapt and take advantage of the new opportunities that are coming forward. And just on a last note, when we tell the private sector and we tell governments that we no longer want business as usual, I'd like to say it to our sector as well, across the environmental sector. We can no longer do business as usual. We need to move quickly and be as innovative as possible as we face these challenges. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Candice, for a very interesting presentation. Colleagues, are there any questions? I can allow maybe initially some 10 minutes for questions or questions of clarity to Candice before we start with the next presentation. Laura, if you can see any comments, please alert me.
There is a question from Steve Collins. Steve, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question briefly? Thank you.
Hi, thanks everyone. Candice, I want to know, you talk about a building block. What do you mean? Practically, I understand you're saying that different places have got different building blocks. but like practically, what are you talking about? Are you talking about parcels of land? Are you talking about management agreements? I'm trying to understand what you mean.
Sure, thanks, Steve. So with a building block, what we refer to is the primary tools that we need in order to get a new finance solution off the ground. So if we take the biodiversity tax example from South Africa as our case study, in this case for building blocks, there were 5 primary building blocks that had to be in place, almost like foundational cornerstones. And if we were missing those, we would never have got the solution off the ground, and we would never been able to take it to scale. So in that instance, we had grassroots community engagement was one building block. We needed to make sure that the tax incentive actually met the needs of stakeholders on the ground. The other was policy support from national government, because obviously we needed National Treasury to allow us to amend the Income Tax Act and create that tax incentive. We needed niche technical tax skills on board, because it was a very technical financial tool that we had to create, and so on. So in each instance, we're going to be looking at slightly different building blocks for each finance solution. So when we're unpacking something like carbon payments and to begin piloting that in South Africa for the first time, what are our primary foundational tools for carbon payments that have to be there? And if we're missing them, is that solution still going to be viable? So for example, with carbon payments, we're going to look at the actual price for carbon in a regulatory market or a voluntary market. Is that price for carbon sufficient to cover the costs of running a carbon project? So that would be a primary building block. And by having those building blocks in place, we're able to determine the critical success factors for each solution. And then we can translate those building blocks elsewhere. So for example, with the tax incentive, the discussions with Eswatini about whether this would be something viable for that country's protected areas, we've taken all 5 of those building blocks and translated them into that national context to say, yes, we have policy support from national government. Yes, it's going to financially benefit stakeholders on the ground, etc. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Chap, you've also got a question. Please ask Candice and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Thanks very much, Candice. That was a great presentation. My question might relate a bit to Steve's, in that I'm just querying, you mentioned that you consider some critical success factors for innovative financing mechanisms at landscape level. Which ones, in your opinion, are the most important? Are you talking about accountability in terms of, and outcomes in terms of the expenditure, or what do you mean by that?
So the critical success factors are similar to the building blocks. And so what we do when we follow the finance solution approach that we've developed is that under each of those building blocks, we will list the critical success factors that need to be in place. In other words, if you need national policy support for a particular finance innovation, if you're missing any of the elements to that building block, then you're missing a critical success factor. And so, like I said, there's no one size fits all. They're going to be different in different contexts. But the idea is that we would start at a building block level and then move down to critical success factors. So that allows us to be able to unpack things systematically and slowly, and then allows us to also translate the same principles to a different landscape, even if the critical success factors are going to be slightly different. So for example, if we're looking at bankable projects for SMMEs within wildlife economy operations, one of those critical building blocks is going to be governance structures. And what are the critical success factors that we need to have in place in order to have the right governance structures? So those might be something like having the right legal entity established for the governance structure. It might be having the right stakeholder and decision maker engagement for that particular structure to ensure that all beneficiaries are included and there's adequate beneficiation. And so that's why I say there's no one size fits all, but following those principles means we can determine viability sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Candice.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's great.
Right. Holly, you've got it looks like a statement saying the building block sounds like a criteria or preconditions for any particular type of mechanism to be potentially successful. Is it just a statement, Holly? I assume it's just a statement.
Yeah, just Pete, getting at, you know, the kinds of questions that are being asked. And I think what Candice is saying is that because each of these situations has its unique characteristics, depending on its national legislation, depending on the local conditions, in this field, you're going to know that some of those things will be almost killer assumptions. In other words, if you don't have the opportunity to change the tax law, you won't going to go for a tax incentive. So I think it's just really important, you know, in my experience, that it's very difficult, but there aren't blueprints, right? And that means that local players have to play a pretty big role in seeing what of these mechanisms are even within the realm of possibility. And that becomes even more constrained when you get at, you know, levels that I'm interested in, of getting money right down to these communities where even more layers of complexity come in. So it's just an observation.
Thanks, Holly. Then, colleagues, I'm just going to take one more question from Paul. Paul Ziller. Paul, you want to know about the supply of biodiversity funders and how that's been affected by COVID, and which institutions are active and what kinds of scale. Do you want to elaborate on that, Paul, or is it a question to Candice? Just want to see if you're muted. Paul, oh, here we go. You unmuted. Paul, can you hear us? Candice, can you, so Paul's question around, it's around biodiversity funders and how that's been affected by COVID, and which institutions are active and at what kinds of scale are they active?
So I definitely think there's been an impact just globally. I think in some cases, you know, whether it's traditional funding models, some of those have been moved towards more social concerns or emergency issues around COVID. But at the same time, we've also seen a lot of new funds and new resources come up, specifically to assist certain sectors in COVID, including biodiversity and ecotourism in particular, etc. And so at the same time, there's also a lot of movement in ESG markets globally. So there's private sector opportunities, which means we can move beyond just funders, just looking at traditional funds, whether they're national or international grants, or traditional philanthropic funding, to be able to access more private sector opportunities. But it does take a slight shift. And so even though there have been impacts in some areas, there have also been new opportunities in others. And so, you know, for South Africa example, we've seen numerous investors across the JSE be able to sign up to Principles for Responsible Investment for the first time at a level that's exemplified more than ever before. And so this really is the opportunity to start to begin to put the work that we're doing across landscapes into those mainstreams. I see there's a comment on the chat. Oh, Pete, you answered it. So ESG being environmental, social, and governance markets. So I don't think there is a concrete answer to your question, Paul. I think in some cases there have been a loss and a reduction and a retraction, and in other instances there are new opportunities coming up. And that's where I think we need to have that innovative and opportunistic mindset to begin to translate the work that we're doing and translate the value that we have into these new opportunities.
Great. Thanks, colleagues. Thanks, Candice. So we're going to move to the next presentation, but if you've got any other comments or questions to Candice, there will be an opportunity hopefully towards the end. If you've got time for additional questions and statements and comments. So Kuda, Kuda's next. So I'm sure most of you know Kuda. I mean, she's been part of the TFCA family for quite some time. So Kuda Chigodo is currently the team leader for the long-awaited TFCA financing facility based at IUCN Izaro. She will basically head up the project management unit. which will be based at the IUCN office in Pretoria in South Africa. So before joining IUCN, Kura was the project coordinator for Campfire as part of the UNDP GEF6 project, and that looked at strengthening biodiversity and ecosystem management in the mid to lower Zambezi region of Zimbabwe. And as most of you probably met her, she was part of the Zimpox TFCA unit. And also she worked on quite a number of TFCAs, on Kaza, GLTFCA, Greater Mapukupi, Chimani Mining, Zamoza, and Lower Zambezi, Mana pools. So she's got a wealth of experience that she brings through the TFCA environment and the conservation of biodiversity, program management, project coordinator, and community-based natural resources management and stakeholder engagement. And she's also been part to quite a number of initiatives in the TFCA field through her involvement on various levels in quite a number of TFCAs. Kura holds a master's degree, Master of Science degree in Hospitality and Tourism from Chino University of Technology in Zimbabwe, and she's also a member of the SADC TFCA network and also a former member of the steering committee. So the idea would be that Kura, once the COVID restrictions allow it, that she will basically then move and settle in Pretoria. Kura, welcome, and we're looking forward to your presentation around the TFCA financing facility. Please
Thanks,
go ahead.
Pete. Let me share my screen. So today I'll talk about one of the initiatives within the SADC region to finance TFCAs in the SADC region, and I'm referring to the SADC TFCA financing facility. Okay. The TFCA financing facility is a grant-making mechanism established to support development of TFCAs in the SADC region. It is a culmination of a negotiation process, as you may all know, which involve the German government, SADC Secretariat, and member states to establish a regional fund for TFCAs. This regional fund will be financed by various international cooperating partners in support of SADC TFCAs. The establishment of this fund is well aligned to the SADC TFCA program of 2013, and more specifically to component 2 of the SADC TFCA program, which is about enhancing financing mechanisms for SADC TFCAs. Other SADC and regional policies and protocols, which are also aligned to the financing facility, include the SADC protocol on wildlife conservation and law enforcement, SADC protocol on tourism, protocol on forestry, and more. There are many of them. So in this initial phase of the financing facility, the funding is being received from the German government and channeled through KfW. The main purpose of the financing facility is to provide the basis for long-term and more sustainable investment in tangible measures that strengthen ecological, economic, cultural, and institutional connectivity within SADC TFCAs. The general intention under the financing facility is to leverage additional funds from various partners, including further commitment from the German government, in order to reach an operational funding volume of approximately €100 in the medium to long term. The initial phase of the financing facility is expected to be 6 years long. And the initial funding for this initial phase, we already have €12 million under the financing facility. But there's also an additional commitment from the German government as well of 11 million to give it a total of 23 million euro at the onset. And this initial phase, in this initial phase, we are anticipating to issue out approximately 10 to 20 or more grants. We envisage that there will be slightly more than 20 because of the additional 11 million euro that we will be receiving from the German government. However, the individual size of the projects is expected to range between 300,000 to 3 million euro in the form of large, medium, and small grants. How exactly the size of these grants, how they will be determined by the approval process from the steering committee of the financing facility. There have been a number of agreements which were signed between SADC and the German government, SADC and IUCN in 2019 and in 2020, respectively. And these agreements have paved way for the inception phase of the TFCA financing facility. Moving on to the scope of the financing facility, this is a map of the SADC TFCAs, as we all know, and there are 18 TFCAs that the SADC region is pursuing, which are at various stages of development. And all these TFCAs are beneficiaries of the financing facility. I have, however, highlighted 3 TFCAs which will benefit 80% of the financing facility would be allocated to these 3 TFCAs in the initial phase, and these are Great Limpopo TFCA, Kaza TFCA, and Malawi Zambia TFCA. And these TFCAs, the rationale is that they are already receiving some support from the German government, and the initial phase of the financing facility should go a long way in providing additional funding to provide key outcomes in the development of these TFCAs. The 20% of the funding in the initial phase will be allocated therefore to the remaining 15 TFCAs. But as I indicated, that in the medium to long term, we wish to raise up to 100 million euro worth of funding. All the TFCAs will be able to equitably benefit from the funding from the TFCA financing facility. Now moving on to implementation modalities for the project. As you may all know that IUCN ESARO is the executing agent for the TFCA financing facility. And IUCN is setting up a project management unit, which will be based in Pretoria in South Africa. A steering committee for the project is now in place, comprising of SADC TFCA member states and international cooperating partners. Subject to further assessment of staffing needs and approval by the steering committee, we envisage to have the following positions in the project management unit. And these include the team leader, the program officer, grants, who will be responsible for managing the grant making process, a finance officer. We also would like to have an environmental and social impact assessment officer, as well as an administrator. Moving on to the governance structure for the financing facility. At the helm of this structure, we have the SADC Technical Committee on Wildlife, and the project steering committee will be reporting to the Technical Committee on Wildlife. Then we have SADC Secretariat and IUCN which will be hosting the project management unit. You see that these are almost at the same level, simply because IUCN is executing this project on behalf of SADC Secretariat. Then last but not least, we have the roster of experts. This is a group of external experts who will be recruited to assist with the peer review of project concepts and proposals that will be received from project proponents. So we will be actually advertising a call for applications for any qualified candidates from the region and abroad. Now moving on to the inception phase of the TFCA financing facility. Originally, we anticipated this to take a range of 6 to 9 months. We will see how it goes, how we will progress with the inception phase. But we've already initiated a number of processes to put in place requisite systems for the awarding of the grants. These include establishment of the PMU. The staff recruitment process is already kick-started. We have the project steering committee now in place. We also have an inception work plan and budget. Now I'd like to move to some of the key project mobilization steps. I'm sure many of you would want to know about this. There's a lot of work that has taken place since January 2020, but I've just started from June. And we are anticipating to conclude most of these steps by December 2020. A few of them may overlap into 2021, but already we've witnessed the signing of the implementation agreement between SADC and IUCN, and this was signed in the first week of July. I've already spoken about establishment of the project management unit. Then the steering committee meeting, which is now in place. We are planning to have an inception meeting for the steering committee on the 9th of September this year, that is in 2 weeks' time. We're also planning for the official launch of the TFCA financing facility. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we envisage that this will be a virtual launch, and we will be communicating with all of you, our stakeholders, regarding the timing of the official launch. We are working on approval of project budgets by KFW and funds disbursements as we prepare to implement the project. We've also kickstarted development of the operational manual for the TFCA financing facility, which will provide a lot of guidance to all the stakeholders and most importantly, the grantees in terms of how they can apply for funding. It will talk about who is eligible to apply for funding, what are the eligible activities for funding, and a whole lot of other details. We're also planning to develop a branding and communications plan for the project, and this will be aligned to the SADC communications strategy. And also we wish to have it aligned to the individual TFCA communications plans and strategies for those that have them in place, so that this also adds value to what the TFCAs are already doing. We've also embarked on a procurement process for a consultancy to develop an environmental and social management framework for the project. We are also updating the project log frame, giving specific attention to the project indicators, and because these will be important when we once we start issuing out grants to various implementing partners. I've spoken about the roster of experts, and we are preparing the terms of reference for these experts, and we will publish a call for experts to apply, and then eventually we have them appointed and to assist us with the grant making process. We are also looking into preparing for a launch of an emergency relief call for proposals. And basically this would be in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we want to have it as soon as possible as a fast tracking mechanism to provide the response to COVID-19, and probably to be able to mitigate against the impacts of the pandemic. I've spoken about raising additional funding for the TFCA financing facility up to 100 million euro. And this means that there's a lot of work for us to mobilize additional funding from various international cooperating partners to reach that vision. So we are therefore working on a strategy for resource mobilization, which will also have to be aligned to our branding and communications plan for it to be very effective and to speak to the various partners whom we seek to engage. Finally, looking at the next steps, we are looking forward to getting our work plan for the project approved by the steering committee at their inception meeting. And we are also planning to have our first call for proposals by mid-2021 as a fast tracking mechanism in response to COVID-19 and mitigating its effects. The call for proposals will be shared as widely as possible on various channels, including SADC TFCA network, SADC TFCA portal, TFCA websites, and the various IUCN portals to make sure that we reach as many project proponents as possible in the SADC region. And finally, as the project management unit under IUCN, we are already building synergies with some of IUCN's well-established and managed grant-making facilities, such as the Bioparma Action Component and the Save Our Species program. And we are learning a lot from these initiatives, and we will continue to create opportunities for cross-learning across the various projects. Thank you.
Great, Kura. I think we definitely are very excited that this is now becoming a reality. That's a great initiative. So thanks very much for a very good presentation. Just before I hand it over to the floor, I just want to check something. So in your slide, the team leaders is who you are, the team leader in the organogram, yeah. So
yes, that's me.
Okay.
That's me. So at the moment, I'm the only employee in the project management unit.
Okay.
Sure.
Thanks, Kura. That was a great presentation.
Thanks.
Good. So let me have a look at the comments. Steve, you've got a question around whether this could fund an application to the Global Carbon Fund. Do you want to take the floor, please?
Yeah, thanks. So it's just, you'll recall a couple of weeks ago, we had that presentation by Rod about what was happening in Eswatini. And one of the ideas that came out of that was the idea to do an application for TFCAs in the region and establish a large carbon fund. He was talking about $500 million was the quantity he mentioned. So obviously to do something of like this is going to require work. So given that one of the objectives of this financing facility is to create further funding, I'm wondering whether it couldn't finance that kind of work. Thanks.
Sorry, Steve, I thought it was Global Climate Fund. Was it not Global Climate Fund?
It might well be, but I think there's also a carbon fund which could be applied for.
Okay.
I don't know why, but maybe it's a global climate fund.
Thanks, Steve. I'm not sure if I got your question well. Would you mind to just repeat again?
So what I'm asking is, will this fund be able to fund applications to other funding? Because you say you want to increase the pot that's eventually available for TFCAs. And a few weeks ago, there was this idea for the Global Climate Fund to do an application across TFCAs, given their importance. And it was based on experience in Eswatini, where they're currently implementing a project.
I think it's a Green Climate Fund.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So many acronyms. That's
Okay.
why I even ask about ESGs. I get confused.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. At this point, thanks, Steve. At this point, we wouldn't know, but really the intention is to actually create synergies with these other several initiatives and actually see how we can work together and raise more funding for TFCAs.
Thanks.
Thanks, Guda. Steve, are you?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, okay, good. Guda, then there's a question from Paul Zeller. He's something wrong with his microphone. So Paul wants to know about the criteria and what criteria will be used for applications. And you mentioned the operations manual, which I assume will take care of that. But are there any specific things that you can mention now around specific criteria and the process? And how will the criteria be developed? Is there scope for stakeholder input, or is it something that comes with that's already been agreed to in this process?
Sure, thanks, Pete. The criteria is already available, and we are emphasizing on aligning project proposals to the SADC TFCA program. And there's a whole list of examples of projects that can be funded under the TFCA financing facility. But let me actually hasten to highlight some of the components which may not be eligible for financing under the TFCA financing facility. And one of them is research. It would not be eligible for funding, but a whole lot of other things which are related to the management of species under TFCAs, management of ecosystems, the habitats themselves, and also community-based natural resources management. Those are the three key pillars that we will be focusing on.
Thanks, Guda. And then Paul's got a follow-up question. It's around whether there will be scope for outside agents or experts or interested parties to contribute to ideas and suggestions. But I suppose that's been taken care of. You've got that, what do you call that? That expert panel, or
yes, yeah, the roster of experts.
Yes, so that will be covered by that entity. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but also the steering committee itself will be inviting other partners to their meetings I'm sure, to also get inputs from other external partners, as it were, so that we actually add value to the design of the project.
Great, thanks. Paul, I hope that answers your questions. Clara, is there anything else that you could pick up from the chat box that I might have missed?
No, not really, Pete. There were some comments of Tawanda in respect of the questions from Paul, but they reflect exactly what you and Kuda were saying in any case. So they were just sort of anticipating the answer. So thank you for that.
Great. Thanks, Kuda. It's been a really interesting presentation. And if we got time at the end, colleagues, I'm sure there'll be, excuse me, more time for additional questions. So let's move to the next presentation. Thanks, Kuda. Thanks very much. Colleagues, let's move to the next presentation that will be done by Lisa, who probably don't need any introduction, but I'll do it anyway. So Lisa's got an MSc in biodiversity conservation as well as public administration. So she's been working in international development for 8 years and conservation institutions for that matter, including UNESCO and WWF. And she joined GIZ in 2015. And she's currently at the SADC GIZ Transboundary Natural Resources Program, where she's a technical advisor on TFCAs. So her main responsibility lies in the development and coordination of the TFCA network. So she's party at setting up all these interesting webinars that we've got access to. So thanks for that, Lisa, and the rest of your team, and Clara. And she's also been, obviously through her role, been exposed to a range of international and regional NGOs and donors. So Lisa's going to provide a presentation on current funding opportunities in TFCAs. Lisa, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pete. That's great. Let me just start sharing my screen. I hope so, that you're not on the note side. But good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being able to present here on project funding in TFCAs and an overview of various funding opportunities. I've been asked to present on various opportunities that are there. So in that exercise, I've contacted multiple of donors and NGOs and other institutions in the region. So it will actually be a summary presentation of a lot of other people's initiatives. So I hope everything is covered. If you know of any other initiatives, you're of course welcome to mention that at the end of my presentation. Some of the donors, NGOs are present in this call. So if you have any questions, I hope the ones that you have questions on are actually there so that they can answer that for you. So this is sort of what I will cover, just very briefly why TFCA funding is complex. And then also going into the individual fund program and grant funding that is there. But to just start, why is funding in TFCA so complex? I think that's something that I really sort of noticed while working in TFCAs. Because of course it involves multiple countries, multiple protected areas, a multitude of stakeholders that all sort of jointly want to develop TFCAs. So it's quite a tricky business, and it basically involves multiple funding streams, as we've also learned from Candice. And those funding streams have different time spans. So that's actually quite a difficult business. And many of the funders sometimes forget how much funding also goes into the capacity building and just the general management of TFCAs, for example, setting up secretariats in CASA and Great Limpopo. And then there is also the matter of collaboration between institutions across the landscape. So as we've learned, there are of course different finance streams. You have more market-based funding, domestic expenditure, as well as international funding. So I won't talk about everything here, that's not possible. And I think you've heard a lot about more innovative financing. So I will dive a bit deeper into the traditional type of financing, looking at programmatic funding and grants. First, this is an innovative initiative. It's the Beyond Tourism in Africa Innovation Challenge, organized by the Luke Hoffman Institute together with the African Leadership University and WWF. And it actually seeks to test and find new revenue models. And by submitting your application, you can basically win places at the African Leadership University, as well as access to seed funding. There is a current call for proposals running from 1st of September until the 15th of October. And it is possible to win up to $250,000 of investment money. Go onto the website, but also you see the contact details from Adrian Deleke, who might also, I hope also will be on this call, for if you have any further questions. Then secondly, the UK government, through the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, as well as the British High Commission, also have various funds. Some of these are just funds that you can apply within TFCAs, but there's also one new program that applies specifically to one TFCA landscape. But to start off with, the Darwin Initiative. This is an initiative set up in 1992 as a UK bilateral competitive grant scheme. It supports countries with rich biodiversity but poor financial resources. And there are basically three types of funding. The one is applying for main project funding with a range between £50,000 and £500,000. Then there are also fellowships awards, which are aimed at capacity building in developing countries. And then also partnership project, which is basically helping new organizations that want to apply for funding application. For this, you can also look on the website, and there's also a specific email that you can ask further questions on. Then we have the next one, which is the Illegal Wildlife Trade Challenge Fund. And I think you might have heard of this before. It was first launched at the International Illegal Wildlife Trade Conference in 2014. And so far it has funded 85 projects worldwide. The typical project costs are between 50,000 and 600,000, and they span from 1 to 3 years. And the funding decisions are underpinned by an illegal wildlife trade advisory group. They have an annual call for proposals, and their aim is to tackle all aspects of the global poaching and illegal wildlife trade problems in plants and animals, with specific issues on enforcement. Again, you can look on the website, or also email Zara Wright. She will also be on this call. So if you have any specific questions, please don't hesitate to ask those. Then a new initiative, which is very exciting, the Biodiversity Landscape Fund, basically announced by the UK Prime Minister at the UN General Assembly in 2019. The 100 million Biodiverse Landscape Fund, pounds, aims to address global biodiversity loss and poverty. And the fund will support an estimated 5 biodiversity areas, biologically diverse areas. And in the first funding stream, which is expected early 2021, there are 2 areas that are chosen out, and one of these is the CASA TFCA. There's not so much information on it yet, but if you do want to read more about the press briefing on this, you can also look on this website. And it's basically something where we have to watch the space. Then the IUCN BioPharma program. We have had presentations before by the IUCN BioProgram in previous webinar discussions. But it's a EU-funded initiative which is implemented by the IUCN and the Joint Resource Center with a 60 million investment. The BioPharma program also launched an action component to provide funding opportunities to improve conservation in priority areas through tangible on-ground action. The priorities for Southern Africa can be found on the website in an Excel sheet, so you can look at that. And there are basically 3 types of grants. You have a rapid response grant, which is also in response to COVID-19. And this is open till the 31st of December with a maximum amount of 50,000 euros. Then there are a small technical grant and a medium grant. They are closed at the moment, but I believe the small technical grant is opening at the end of this year, and the medium grant next year, but it might also be the other way around. Again, we do have people in the webinar that can answer questions on the website to especially find more details about the rapid response grant for any COVID measures. Then we have the IUCN Save Our Species African Wildlife Initiative. This is a program running from 2017 until 2024 worth 12 million euros. And it's funded by Europe Aid, targeting large carnivores. It gives out 25 threatened species grant and 25 action grants. Recently, the rapid action grants received more funding to also include COVID-19 response. And the bulk of this funding, it will be allocated to South Africa, with also a separate call for proposals. The IUCN Save Our Species grant has two main types of grants. As already mentioned, the threatened species grant are awarded through periodic calls for proposals, and only civil society organizations can apply, focusing, as said, on carnivore species. The Rapid Action Grant is an open-ended call currently, and they're designed to enable immediate response to new and emerging threats, which also has a COVID-19 call for proposals open currently, which is going beyond the carnivore species, also targeting terrestrial and freshwater threatened species, and is available for civil society organizations only, except for South Africa, where public entities can also apply. Maximum size for action grant is 100,000 euros. Again, there's an online platform through which you have to apply, and you can also follow here the website. Then moving on to combating wildlife crime, the USAID VUCA Now program, which I think many of you know, is a program which works mostly with 3 transfrontier conservation areas. In those 3 transfrontier conservation areas, there are also existing projects with NGOs directly managed by USAID, but the USAID VUCA Now program as objective is to basically catalyze learning and increase collaboration to combat wildlife crime. There is now also a call for proposals, which is open currently, so please pay attention, especially for those working on combating wildlife crime. They're on 4 thematic areas: innovative approaches to disrupt poaching and trafficking, mitigating drivers, novel approaches for community beneficiation, and robust investigation reporting. Both non-for-profit as well as for-profit institutions are eligible. However, applicants must be able to demonstrate success, although applicants with minimal exposure to USG funding are also encouraged to apply. The award grant ranges between 30 and 150,000 US dollars, not exceeding 18 months, and deadline for submission is 30th of September. There is on a Google Drive where all the documents are that you need to apply, which is here. And Imakanda, if you're in the call, I would kindly ask you to maybe put this Drive link in the chat so that people can find it easily. And there's also contact Patso, but Imakanda is also in the call to answer any further questions. Then the JEF, which is a different type of funding source, but I think I've exchanged too much with Jaime on the JEF to not include it. I have to actually mention, for those that do know Jaime, he is actually left the JEF last Friday. So unfortunately, he is not in this call. But the Global Environment Fund, it's basically a mechanism to implement multilateral environmental agreements, especially CBD and others, like you see on this slide. There are 183 eligible countries, and there are two key concepts that are interesting for TFCAs that I will talk more about, which is the biodiversity and the international water focal area. What is very important, if anyone is interested to access GEF funding, much of the funding is according to country allocations, as well as priority areas in countries that are negotiated in a 4-year cycle. This cycle runs from 2018 to 2022, and the next cycle starts in 2022. So much of the current funding is already allocated, but I think it's important for TFCAs to sort of be aware of how to be able to access that funding. The first step is to know your GEF focal point in country or countries that you want to have apply for a project on, and also identify your most suitable implementing agency, which you can find on this slide. Then just very briefly on international waters, the GEF 7, which is currently running, focuses on 3 main areas for the international waters focal point, which is strengthening blue economy opportunities, increasing governance in the areas beyond natural jurisdiction, and enhancing water security in freshwater ecosystems. For the biodiversity component, GEF 7 focuses on mainstreaming biodiversity across sectors, addressing direct drivers to protect habitat and species, and further develop biodiversity policy. Under the GEF 7, international waters was allocated $450 million, which is not linked to STAR allocation. So it's much easier for international waters to apply for cross-border funding. Although currently for GEF 7, we're already halfway through the cycle, so much of it is allocated, although there are available funds. For biodiversity, there's much more allocated, but it's worked through STAR allocation. So on the left, you see countries that apply to SADC, and BD is biodiversity. So you see approximately what the allocations are there. I've talked to Jeff over the course of the last week to find out more information. So the international waters does of course suit many of the TFCAs in them, but often you still need additional biodiversity STAR allocation funding for the biodiversity aspects of any application. The GEF 8 negotiations, however, begin at the end of 2020. So for anyone that is interested to pursue this, and I think it's very welcomed by GEF, it's good to already start negotiations as early as possible. Contacts are Astrid, who unfortunately couldn't join. She had technical problems, as well as Ibrahima, who is not the biodiversity contact point, but while Jaime is no longer with GEF, he's able to answer any biodiversity questions. Yeah. Then one of the GEF funded projects that I think many of us are also in contact with, and it's not so much that they have grants, but I think I thought it was quite important to mention more on it, is the Global Wildlife Program. So this is a global project working with also country projects of over 232 million. Currently, many of the projects are already ongoing. However, not everything is yet decided on. And if you go on the website, there's actually, you will find somewhere a map where you can click on the country that you're interested in and see what projects are ongoing. And you can always reach out to the contact person for that country, or reach out to Mr. Ellison Wright. And then there also global funding, which I think in this case is something where maybe SADC should listen more to, or even ourselves, which is for coordination, knowledge management, and capacity building. And there's a next phase coming up as well with another 9 million, including issues of wildlife-based economy. And this is just very briefly the map. Then moving on to the International Climate Initiative. I think many of you also know this, but this is a more programmatic type of funding. that the German Ministry of the Environment and Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety has a call for proposals on every year. And it finances both climate and biodiversity programs that aim to contribute to meeting the Paris Agreement and the Aichi targets. Budget for programs is quite considerate. It's considerable. It's between 5 to 20 million euros for biodiversity programs and 15 to 20 million euros for climate programs. And the maximum funding period is 8 years. How the selection process works is that normally around November, October, thematic areas are basically published on the website so that you have an idea what kind of funding projects would be eligible in that funding call for proposals. Then there's a first deadline for program outlines that is due in the early of the year, which will follow a pre-selection. And then those that are through the pre-selection can submit a full proposal. For those institutions, including GIZ, but I know also WWF is also quite involved in that, that submit quite a number of proposals throughout the world, they often even have a pre-selection. So if you do contact any of the institutions that have quite a lot of experience working in ICI, you have to be quick basically to work on any project ideas. Then also to make you aware that there are also country-specific selection processes, so country-specific funding. I just wanted to make you aware that there is currently a South African call for proposals out, or for projects. Yeah, so you can basically apply until the end of this month. So if you do think of anything for South Africa, you can look on the website quickly. Then this is, we wanted to just give a quick overview also what the German Development Corporation supports in TFCAs. This is not necessarily grants funding, but it's ongoing programmatic funding, and mostly the member states as well, sort of the TFCA desk officers are really involved in deciding on which projects will be funded. But the KfW is mainly working on financial support to TFCAs in the region. As already explained, Bakuda is supporting directly CASA, Great Limpopo, and Malawi Zambia TFCA, the NICA component. And now there will also be a different type of funding model through the SADC TFCA financing facility as well, which is intended to be a multi-donor trust fund. Then there is also an upcoming other facility, which is the training program for wildlife management ranges. This is another watch this space, as well as bilateral support. Niels is also in the school for any questions. And then GIZ, this is the program that I'm working for, the Transboundary Use and Protection of Natural Resource Program. This is a program which provides technical support, not financial support, which ran from 2015 until this year, and is focusing on 3 other TFCAs, ARTP, Lebombo, Malawi, Zambia, as well as support the Secretariat and the TFCA network. Just to let you know that next year there will be a new project on climate resilience and NRM, with again an emphasis on TFCA. So we won't be gone, we will still be there, it's just with a different focus. And we've just actually closed the call for proposals. Unfortunately, I hope some of you have applied to that. We have about 200,000 per project, 3 projects in total. However, I wanted to let you know that one of the objectives of our project is also to support fundraising. So either for ICI, GCF, or JEF, we are also able to provide technical support to enhance the ability to fundraise. And this is just a very brief overview, well, big overview of the German development support in the TFCAs by both KfW and GIZ, as well as the regional programs that are at the top here. TFCA financing facility, there are also 3 other funds that I wanted to just briefly make you aware of. The first one is for those working in seascapes or marine protection or marine TFCAs. There's the Blue Action Fund, which is a fund again implemented by IUCN and funded through KfW, the French Development Agency, and the Swedish Foreign Ministry. There's a next call for proposals expected on the first half of 2021. So if you do have any ideas or project ideas, please just look at the Blue Action Fund. Then the Bio Fund, this is not so much a grant-making fund, but it's, I think, still a very interesting model, which will probably come out as well in our Thursday discussion more. But this is a multi-donor endowment fund, which is run by an independent Mozambican foundation, but has received considerable funding from KfW, the World Bank, JEF, Conservation International, and the EU. And it funds 47% of the parks in Mozambique, with also a lot of funding going to Great Limpopo, Lubombo, and Chimanimani TFCA. Then lastly, the Legacy Landscape Fund. And unfortunately, it's a bit with the same with the Biodiversity Fund from the UK. I don't have that much information on it yet, but it's important to watch this space. It's a global initiative by BMZ, KfW, the French development company, Campaign for Nature, FZS, IUCN, UNESCO World Heritage Centers, and the WWF. And it will be more an innovative way or an innovative funding model expected to launch in 2021. And this is just very briefly on the Bio Fund, just for you to see how the fund established since 2007, starting with a conference on sustainable financing, and then the first funding tranche in 2012. Yeah, since then it has really leveraged a lot of funding, and is also going to work together with the World Bank MOSBio Fund, also going to 3 TFCAs in Mozambique. And it's quite an innovative funding mechanism. However, the Biofund, yeah, it basically funds all the gray areas in Mozambique. It might have, this is a slide from 2018, so it might have expanded since then. But we do have someone from the MOSBio on the, sorry, the Biofund on the calls if you have any further questions. That's all. Thank you, Pete.
Great, Lisa. That was an excellent summary. Thank you very much. I assume this will be available to participants. Is it on the? You put it on the portal.
Yeah. So I think because there's so many links in this presentation, and probably people want to see it. Those links, we'll upload it today, and I'll put a link where we will upload the presentations on the chat. I'll just stop sharing my screen. So yeah, that's I'll do that so that everybody can access it right away.
Great, that's a great resource. Thank you. I see on the call it's Niels and Dieter Imakando from Buchanau, or Elizabeth from Luke Hoffman, or Leo. Well, I'm not sure who's on from MOSBio, but colleagues, any of you want to add to anything that Lisa said? I saw Niels made a comment earlier on around the importance of impact on the ground linked to the TFCA facility, which is welcomed. Sean from Biofund, you want to, here you go. Any comment from your side? Any additions? Sean? Or any of the other colleagues? Or Niels?
Maybe just a word from the Luke Hoffman Institute and the Innovation Challenge. Thanks for that. We're very excited about this. It will be officially launched September 1st. The target audience for this are young entrepreneurs, primarily from Africa. And we're really trying to go very broad on this and to get some very creative ideas. And as was mentioned by Lisa, the primary prize, or we'd like to think the primary prize, is actually a spot in the African Leadership University's acceleration program, new acceleration program, I should say, that we're co-designing with them. There is access to pre-seed funding in the early stages. It's a bit more modest than the $250 200,000 that was mentioned, because that's actually our targets. So the current secured is less, although it's still an interesting proposal, I hope, for innovators, and we hope to reach the 250,000 targets. So if you're interested in that, I mean, it will only be officially launched on September 1st, but feel free to visit our website, and we're available now for questions or any other time. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that feedback. Colleagues, anyone else from Niels or Dito? Anyone else from Imakando?
Well, thanks, Pete. If you want, this is Niels. Yeah, I can just hear you. Yeah, good afternoon. Just a quick word. I will be around on Thursday as well, so I don't want to steal your time. I think today is more for questions and answers and the chat. Just to add a little bit, well, we've been seeing lots of opportunities, lots of fundings and stuff like that. I think the earlier discussion also from Holly and the building blocks from Candice is crucial. It's not just about money. We also need to have the framework right. Governance, management issues, priorities, spendings, etc. And really delivering. The other issue, let's not just think about biodiversity conservation. TFCAs are really kind of integrated approaches. So we also have water funding, climate funding going to it, business development, infrastructure development if we want to have tourism. We also have the COVID-19 situation, which now brings a lot of new challenges to the business plans, where we get really the conservation economy going to. So that there are lots of interesting discussions on that, and part of them definitely already covered under the webinar. We have more funds for private sector development and others, but we still need a lot more, and especially really success stories and more pooled funding to make impact at scale and with the right scope. But I think more to be discussed on Thursday. Thanks for giving me the floor. Over.
Thanks, Niels. I actually put you on the spot a bit, but thanks for that feedback. So, Clara, would you just give a brief introduction to Thursday's session at the end of this before we close? Would that be possible?
Pete, can I just also pose a question?
Yeah, sure.
I see Zara is actually on the call from the British Embassy in Gaborone. I just wanted to ask to what extent actually the UK government, to what extent she knows, is already working with TFCAs. Of course, I know that now CASA is selected for the Biodiversity Fund, but for the other two initiatives that I've also mentioned, the Darwin Initiative and the illegal wildlife trade one, is it are these more national initiatives or also cross-border?
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. I'll just start by introducing myself because I think it's the first time that I've met or virtually met most of you. So my name is Zara Reid. I work on regional illegal wildlife trade and security policy in Southern Africa. I work for the UK Foreign Office, soon to be Foreign and Development Office. And I'm based in Botswana, although I cover SADC as a region on illegal wildlife trade. So it's quite an exciting job that I have, and it's one of the first jobs that we've done as the UK government internationally on focusing solely on the illegal wildlife trade. So it's great to meet all of you virtually and be linked up and to have your contacts. And thank you as well to Lisa. Thanks very much for outlining all of those funds, and thank you for so clearly outlining the UK government funds as well. I appreciate that. On your specific question on how much the UK government is already funding transfrontier conservation areas, the Illegal Wildlife Trade Challenge Fund does fund projects that are transboundary, and it's encouraging transboundary projects at the moment. So in the latest bidding round, which closed last month, there was a particular focus on projects that were transboundary. And the Darwin Initiative similarly would never, I don't think, discourage a transboundary project if it was presented with one. But the Biodiverse Landscapes Fund is probably our first fund that is focusing directly on these types of projects of transfrontier conservation areas. And it's a really exciting fund. It's great that it was announced last year by the Prime Minister, and it's just been a bit delayed because of COVID-19. But we're hoping to be able to release more information about timelines and the bidding for the fund, hopefully over the next few months. But as Lisa explained, it looks like CASA will be one of the landscapes that is funded. So that's a really great opportunity to focus on livelihoods, halting biodiversity loss, and reducing poverty. Hope that answers your question, Lisa, but I'm happy to take more questions as well.
No, that's it. When I was presenting on it, like how much is actually flowing towards cross-border projects, because it's of course a bit more challenging working on two sides of the borders. But this is great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Zara. Thanks, Lisa. I can see 2 hands up. Imakando, do you want to comment on your grants program?
Well, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to Lisa for your presentation and for covering VUCA-NOW very well. What I just wanted to encourage everyone is that I think as you have seen from Lisa's presentation around VUCA-NOW, our grants are small. It's between 50 to 150,000. We're encouraging a lot of the upcoming, NGOs and CBOs around those themes to really encourage them to apply. I think most of us that are on this call deal with bigger sums and bigger programs, but funds like ours can be able to supplement and plug in where we cannot reach. So I think it's just to encourage people to be able to share widely the call for proposals, the email that is there, and I'll also say where you can find the call for proposals. Otherwise, VUCA-NOW is not operating in a vacuum. It operates with other landscape partners that are some of them on this call. So thank you very much, Lisa, for your job.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Imakando. That's good feedback. Thank you. Glenn?
Thank you, Pete, and good afternoon to everyone. It's advice I'm looking for. And let me preface my request for advice by saying that we manage a community-owned lodge that operates just outside of the Pafuri Gate into Kruger National Park. There's an investment that's been made by the South African government in constructing the lodge for the community and operationalizing it of well in excess of 50 million rand. It was on the verge of breaking even as an operating entity after nearly 5 years of operating, just before COVID-19 struck, and now it is in the process of potentially being decimated. The consequence of the decimation is that approximately 30 people will lose their jobs, direct jobs. The economic activity that we've engendered in the area will be lost, and the infrastructure risks being destroyed. And what we need for the lodge is around 4 million rand to replace the turnover that's been lost as a consequence of the shutdown that we've experienced. And so amongst the very real problems that we face on the ground, and this is what I guess makes anyone who's on this webinar today involved in the actual operation of lodges stress and very tense, is that today the South African government or the Unemployment Insurance Fund announced that they have suspended all TERS UIF payments for the foreseeable future while they investigate what they believe are certain fraud actions that have taken place. Now that's 6 weeks of salaries that people are just not going to get as a consequence of this. And that's what's happening on the ground. Businesses are going bankrupt on a daily basis. So it's fantastic to hear of all these initiatives, and particularly the first one. But my question is, how do we source the necessary relief funding that actually can happen in the next 6 weeks, not in the next 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, because if we don't do something now, there won't be a tourism industry left to save in the next few months, especially in South Africa. And I'm sure the same applies elsewhere. And that is my biggest concern, is for now, what is it we can do? And does anyone have any ideas, suggestions, or funds we're not aware of, or assistance they can provide to people like ourselves to tap into these funds? Because that's what we desperately and urgently need. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Glenn. So that's almost like an urgent call for action. Colleagues, I'm not sure if any one of the panel members or anyone on this call could give some ideas to Glenn around access to COVID relief funding that's fairly quickly accessible. I'm not sure if Lisa, have you picked up anything, or Candice, you would know, because it seems like it's specific relating to South Africa. Remco, you've got your hand up. Is that relating to this question?
I think he's from the Small Action Grant.
Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Remco van Merm. I'm Species Conservation Grants Coordinator at IUCN. I run the IUCN Save Our Species program, which Lisa also mentioned earlier. And we currently have a call open specifically for South Africa, which is open to civil society organizations and public entities. And one of the areas where we see the grants that we have available being used is precisely also to address losses of income for local communities who were reliant on tourism. But with the caveat that the grants that we fund need to also have an impact on threatened species that are impacted by this loss of income, and potentially an escalation in threats to these species as a result of that hit to the local economy. As Lisa mentioned, the size of the grants is a maximum of 100,000 euros. So I don't know how much of a relief that could be in your situation, but you'd be welcome to explore the the requirements for our grants that are available at the website that Lisa included in the presentation. And if you're interested to submit an application, and I'm available for further answering further questions if you have any.
Thanks, Remco.
My contact information is available on our website as well.
Would you mind putting that on the chat box as well, Remco?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I see there's also a comment from Candice that they've got a preliminary list of emergency and relief funds. It seems like Candice will share it as well with Lisa, and she can also make it available to our colleagues and to Glenn. Dieter, you've got a comment?
Yeah, just for information, hello, this is Dieter from Gaborone. Hello to everybody. Yeah, we are getting some COVID-19 emergency funds, but well, Glenn, unfortunately, it will not go to South Africa, but we will allocate him to the Masa TFCA in the Kasungulukususi area where we've been working for the last couple of years. So this will involve some cash funding and cash for work activities to sort of bring lost salaries or lost income back to some of the community members at least. So we don't know, perhaps there will be additional COVID-19 funding coming next year, but the conditions and possibilities we don't know yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Dieter. Thanks very much. Glenn, I think what we'll do, as per Candice's suggestion, is between myself and Lisa and Clara and Candice and the other panelists, I'm not sure if Kuda is interested or to be party, we'll see if we can look at existing having an existing list of emergency relief funds, which Candice seemed to have some sort of a preliminary list, and we'll see if we can maybe update it and make it available.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you for the input.
Great. Thanks, Glenn. Colleagues, any other points or any other questions? Clara, if I missed anything on the chat?
No, you haven't missed anything on the chat. And thank you to everybody who put their email addresses just for clarity, so that Len or anybody else can have a look at, can contact you directly and have a look at what's available. And I just see now Sean from Mozambique also said that Biofund has an emergency program, but for Mozambique only. I just wanted to sort of add to the discussions over funding for SADC TFCAs in saying that the SADC TFCAs also respond to a SADC strategic direction whereby conservation is also linked to natural resource management for poverty reduction and socioeconomic development. So a lot of the funds that have been mentioned by Lisa also require a response to more sort of human emergencies in a conservation arena. So we would encourage also projects that look at the nexus between conservation and human development.
Thanks, Laura. Great, colleagues. Anything else?
Oh, I see it's just that Sean says there's an...
Yeah, we just mentioned that. From Mozambique, from Biofund, yeah.
Thanks for that, Sean. It's noted. Thanks very much. Colleagues, anything else from anyone or any questions to the panelists? If nothing, then maybe before I close, Clara or Lisa, do you want to just give a quick spiel about Thursday's session?
Yeah, thank you. So Thursday, as usual, we have our roundtable discussion, which is a 1-hour event between 1:30 and 2:30 in the afternoon, South Africa time. And this week, the moderator will be Candice, who you met today, and she will have 4 panelists coming from the donor international NGO community. So one will be Doreen Robinson. She's currently Chief of Wildlife at UNEP, but a lot of you may remember her when she was the head of the Climate and Environment Unit of the USAID Southern Africa Mission. And then Niels Meyer, who intervened today, who's the Principal Project Manager for the KfW German Development Bank, heavily involved in Southern Africa and TFCAs for many years, and especially with the creation of the funding facility for TFCA. Tebogo Matlahare, who's a program officer for the delegation to the EU of the EU to the Republic of Botswana and SADC, also who will be talking about the programs available under the EU programs. And then finally, Ellison Wright, also mentioned today because he is a Senior Natural Resource Management Specialist for the Global Wildlife Program at the World Bank. So the 4 panelists with Candice will be discussing financing and funding for TFCA's initiatives, and also discuss a little bit what has been changing over the years in the way the donor community sees funding for conservation in developing countries, and looking into the future of a post-2020 scenario. So if you're interested, and I hope you are, please join us, register and join us on Thursday at 1:30 in the afternoon, South Africa time. And maybe Pete, do you want to close from your side, and then I'll...
Yeah,
thank
great,
you.
thanks, Clara. It's another great panel, and possibly a very interesting discussion coming up. Yeah, just want to thank the panel members, Candice, Kuda, and Lisa. Thanks very much for your time and inputs and your availability to participate today, and also to all the participants and all the good questions. It was a really good discussion. And finally, thanks to Clara and Lisa for putting this together. It's been a great webinar series so far, and thanks for today. And have a good week further. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Pete, and thanks you to everybody. Thank you, Kuda, Candice,
Thank you, Clara.
and
Bye.
Lisa.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. You
Bye-bye.
can unmute yourself and up video yourself and wave goodbye if you wish. Thank you for joining us today as well, everybody, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Guys,
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Moses.